What if I told you that how long you've been a Christian has almost nothing to do with how spiritually mature you actually are? You can memorize scripture, lead a small group, never miss a Sunday service, and still be, in the words of author Peter Scazzaro, an emotional infant. Now, that's not a criticism. Think of it as a diagnosis for a problem that keeps so many of us feeling anxious, stuck, and disconnected from the very God we're trying so hard to serve. So many of us are living what Scazzaro calls a tip of the iceberg spirituality. We spend all our energy managing the 10% of our lives that everyone sees: our church activities, our public behavior, our Sunday smiles. But underneath the surface, the massive hidden 90% of our inner world is actually steering the ship. Our unprocessed emotions, our old family wounds, our secret fears, that's what's really in control. It's quietly sabotaging our peace, our relationships, and our connection with God. This video is going to give you a clear assessment of 7 signs you might be an emotional infant, and then give you a practical plan to finally grow up from the inside out. The first sign of an emotional infant is that you use God to run from God. I know that sounds like a contradiction, but it's one of the most common symptoms of an unhealthy spiritual life. It looks like being hyper busy with church activities. You're on 3 committees, you volunteer for every event, and your schedule is packed with doing for God. But all this activity becomes a holy sounding excuse to avoid the terrifying silence of just being with God. It's a way to run from the difficult emotions you don't know what to do with, like anger, sadness, and fear. An emotional infant looks for other people and activities to take care of them emotionally. They can't stand silence or being alone because in those quiet moments, all the feelings they've been stuffing down start to bubble up. So they pray, but their prayers are mostly just a list of demands to fix their problems. Their ministry becomes a way to find validation and feel important, not a genuine flow of a deep inner life with Christ. The problem is this doing for God isn't flowing from being with God. So the deep transformation we're all craving never happens. We're just adding another layer of religious performance over a heart that hasn't healed. The second sign is that you ignore, deny, or try to spiritualize away your feelings. Emotional infants often see emotions like anger, sadness, and fear as unspiritual or a sign of weak faith. So when they feel angry, they clamp down on it and call it righteous indignation. When they feel deep sadness, they slap a happy face and quote a Bible verse about joy. They can't express their real emotions, and that makes it nearly impossible to love God, others, and themselves well. But the Bible is filled with raw, unfiltered emotion. 2/3 of the Psalms are Psalms of lament, of people crying out to God. Jesus himself wept. The Apostle Paul talked about his own despair. The ability to be honest and vulnerable with God about how we really feel is a huge sign of maturity. An emotional adult knows that feelings aren't good or bad. They're messengers. They're signals from our soul that something needs attention. An infant is ruled by their feelings. They have tantrums or shut down when things don't go their way. An adult, however, can acknowledge their feelings without being controlled by them. They can say, I feel angry right now, and explore that anger with God instead of pretending it doesn't exist or lashing out. To the degree we can't be honest about our emotions, we stay emotionally and spiritually stuck. The third sign you might be an emotional infant is that you use spirituality to avoid conflict. You dodge tension and smooth over disagreements at all costs because on some level you believe that admitting there's a problem is a sign of spiritual failure. By doing this, you miss out on true peace and settle for a false peace, burying issues instead of actually resolving them. If someone hurts you, an emotional adolescent might cut them off, withhold forgiveness, or keep a running tally of their wrongs. They might gossip about the problem with someone else instead of going directly to the person who hurt them. That isn't peacemaking. It's just fear. Jesus didn't shy away from conflict. He directly challenged the religious leaders and flipped tables in the temple. He also gave us a direct command in Matthew 5 to leave our gift at the altar and go get right with our brother. True spiritual maturity means having the courage to speak the truth in love, to listen with empathy even when it's tough, and to work through disagreements with respect. Emotional adults can state their own beliefs and values without getting defensive and can respect others without needing to change them. This is a key skill for loving well. The fourth sign is that unwritten rules from your family still have more power over your life than the gospel. Peter Scazzaro teaches that we have to go back in order to go forward. This isn't about dwelling on the past. It's about finally admitting how your family history shaped the way you see the world, yourself, and God. Maybe you grew up in a home where love was conditional, so you became a high achiever to earn approval. And now you're trying to earn God's love through performance in your spiritual life. Or maybe you grew up in a family that avoided conflict at all costs, and now you can't handle the slightest disagreement in the church. We learn these survival scripts long before we ever come to faith. And if we don't intentionally break their power, they'll just shape our spirituality into a fake version of maturity. Emotional infants and children take every disagreement as a personal attack because their sense of self is so fragile. An emotional adult, on the other hand, is deeply convinced they are loved by Christ and doesn't need to look to others for constant approval. The power of the past is essential. It lets you stop living out of old wounds and start living from your new identity as a beloved child of God. We're a little more than halfway through, and I know this is getting deep. If any of this is hitting home for you, I want you to know that you're not alone. Let me know in the comments which sign is standing out to you the most. Your honesty might be the very thing someone else needs to see to feel understood. The fifth sign is a complete lack of respect for your own God-given limits. Emotionally immature people often live without any boundaries. They try to do it all and constantly bite off more than they can chew. This usually comes from a good place, a desire to serve, but it's rooted in the false belief that our worth comes from our productivity. We forget that God is God and we are not. Jesus himself modeled limits. He didn't heal every sick person. He didn't feed every hungry beggar. He often withdrew from the crowds to rest and pray. That feeling of burnout, that bone-deep tiredness that a good night's sleep can't even fix, that's often a sacred message from God. Scazzaro calls this hitting the wall. It feels like failure, but it's actually a divine invitation to stop, to surrender, and to learn to receive God's grace instead of constantly striving. An emotional adult can honestly assess their own limits, their strengths, and their weaknesses, and talk about them freely. They understand that saying no to one thing is really saying yes to something more important, like the health of their own soul and their connection with God. Embracing your limits is a profound act of faith, trusting that God's work doesn't depend on your frantic effort. The sixth sign of an emotional infant is being preoccupied with other people's faults. This often hides behind the mask of discernment or feeling a responsibility to correct people you think are in the wrong. But underneath, it's usually a way to feel superior and avoid looking at your own junk. Emotional adolescents tend to be critical, making quick, harsh judgments about other people's behavior. It's a classic example of what Jesus talked about in Matthew 7, trying to take the speck out of your brother's eye when you've got a giant log in your own. Maturity, on the other hand, is marked by humility and a deep awareness of your own weakness and your own desperate need for grace. Gives people room to make mistakes and to just be human. They value people for who they are, not for how they perform or what they can offer. The real measure of our Spiritual maturity isn't how much we know or how many ministries we're in. The ultimate measure is love. And you can't truly love others well when you're constantly sitting in judgment over them. The final sign is dividing your life into sacred and secular boxes. This is where God gets his Sunday slot, but he's pretty much benched on Monday through Saturday. For the emotional infant, God is experienced at church or with other Christians, but rarely at work or at home. This split creates a huge integrity gap where we're not the same person on the inside as we are on the outside. We have a church self and then a real world self. True spiritual adulthood is all about integration. It's about seeing all of life as sacred ground. It's about being with Jesus all day long, whether you're drafting an email, changing a diaper, or leading a meeting. The Apostle Paul said, whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. For the mature adult, faith isn't an event you go to. It's the lens through which you see all of reality. It's a continual, moment-by-moment communion with God that fills every part of your life with his presence and purpose. Recognizing these signs isn't about shame. It's about hope. Awareness is the first step towards real change. If you saw yourself in any of these descriptions, the good news is that there's a clear path forward to grow into an emotionally and spiritually mature adult. Peter Scazzaro lays out a really practical plan, and it starts with simple, intentional steps. First, be before you do. Start by building 5 minutes of silence into your day. Just sit before God and ask, God, what am I feeling right now? And then actually listen. This builds self-awareness. Second, begin to break the power of the past. Start by acknowledging how your story has impacted you and bring those wounds to God for healing. Third, embrace God's gift of limits. Practice saying no without feeling guilty and intentionally schedule time to rest. These aren't just self-help tips. They are discipleship practices that create space for God to do his deep, transformative work in you. If you want to go deeper, I highly recommend Peter Scazzaro's book and workbook, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. It's a resource that has profoundly shaped my own journey, and I'll link it for you in the description below. Growing up is a choice. It's a decision to put away childish things, just like the Apostle Paul said. This journey from emotional infancy to adulthood isn't easy, but it is the path to abundant life Jesus promised, a life of peace, integrity, and a deep, authentic love for God and others. It's about giving Jesus access to the 90% of the iceberg below the surface so he can heal you from the inside out. God isn't looking for your perfection. He's looking for your willingness. He wants to give you grace and glory and will not hold back any good thing from you as you seek to honor him with your whole heart. The journey toward emotional and spiritual health is the most important work you will ever do. This is the deep work, the kind that doesn't happen through more activity, but through honesty, stillness, and formation. If you want to start exploring that journey, I strongly recommend Peter Scazzaro's work. His assessment can help you identify where you are right now, from emotional infancy to emotional adulthood, and it's a powerful place to begin. We've linked that and other resources in the description below. Hey, and if you're ready for something deeper than surface faith, comment March, and I'll send you details about the Emotionally Healthy Spirituality pilot course when it opens. So go explore. Your soul is worth the work. Remember, you're not disqualified. You are.